episode of Unfiltered Author Talks, not Unfiltered Conversations, although it'll probably go on a conversational base because that's what we do here. But welcome and thank you guys so much for joining tonight. If you're watching live, thank you. And if you're listening later, thank you as well. This is a special one for us because we have 4 ECW folks in here and 2 that just came hot off the press with a new book. And we're very excited to have them come on and talk about that today. I have Patrick Kelly-Fischer up here and I have Phill Greenwalt down there. And we got this British guy beneath me. That's Darren. You may know him or not. But gentlemen, thank you guys so much for joining and taking the time out of your day to come on and talk to us of all people. I know we're Ravens fan, or I'm a Ravens fan. I can't speak on Darren's behalf, but it says a lot about your character that you were able to sit here and have a conversation with a Ravens fan, man. That's awesome. The things are happening. Like, this is good. But thanks again, guys, for joining. If you wanted to take a few seconds to introduce yourselves for those that may not know you that are watching, we'll start with Patrick and go down to Phill.
Yeah, so I'm Pat Kelly-Fischer. Thanks so much for having us, guys. I live out in Denver, and I started writing for Emerging Civil War back in, I think it was like 2021, and then became a member in 2022. And somewhere along the way, Phill reached out to me and said, hey, we should do some stuff on the New Mexico campaign together. And fast forward a few years, and now we have a book.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Phill Greenwalt. I'm trying to remember when I started with Emerging Civil War. I think it was like 2009, 2010, way back. One of the first rounds of editions they made. I guess that calls me more submerged than emerged, I guess. I'm not quite sure. New Mexico, for me, it was, I've always been interested in like the fringes. There's only so many books I thought you could write with the word Gettysburg in it. And then I went 3,000 miles or so from Gettysburg, and they called it Gettysburg of the West. So you really can't escape the word Gettysburg in the Civil War. But it was nice to have another Westerner, even though I found out later he was from Western PA. But I'm glad Pat didn't tell me that on the first call. Otherwise, a Steelers and Ravens fan might not have worked well together. But this is
you guys wrote a book together. That's awesome.
Yeah, we decided to stay in different time zones to do it for the most part.
I get it.
Look, America, if Phill and I can write a book together, a Steelers and Ravens fan can write a book together, we should be able to work out the rest of our shit, too.
Absolutely. No, you're 100% right, man. I was thinking that when you're like, damn, these guys wrote a book together, and it's Steelers, Ravens fans. It's possible. Yeah, it is. So that I have one scripted question, really. I am so interested because you guys both mentioned that you wanted to write a book on the New Mexico campaign for a while now. What on earth got you guys both involved with New Mexico? Because I mean, from where we're at, and your background's in Western PA, and you being here in Maryland, like that's very far removed from where we're at. We've got the Eastern Theater, hell, we have the Western Theater, but it's a little further out west. So if you wouldn't mind taking time to share with us kind of how that came to be, that would be really cool.
For me, it started, I had some sense that there was a campaign out here, but didn't really know anything about it. And then I was on a road trip with my wife through New Mexico, and we were 4 hours into a drive and was ready for a break. And I saw, one of those beautiful brown, there's an historic location this way for Fort Union. And turns out it's not actually that close to the highway. You still have a bit of driving left before you even get to it. But we did a little break there, and helped me realize, like, oh, this is right in my backyard as living out west standards go. It's still, 4 hours from home. But you take what you can get when you live this far west and you study the Civil War. And from there, I just got, we visited the Glorieta battlefield on that trip, and I've done a couple of trips since then. But I think that really did a lot to spark wanting to study this campaign in depth. There's not a lot of, if you've been studying the Civil War for a long time, there aren't that many campaigns left necessarily where you don't know what happens at the end. So I love a good Gettysburg book, but you know the notes they're going to hit for the most part. There's not a lot of surprises coming. And I went into studying this campaign, the South loses in the end. But beyond that, I really didn't even know the outlines of it when we started this process.
Yeah. So back actually when, for me, it started with, ironically, that the Confederate commander is actually buried in Fredericksburg, Virginia, Henry Hopkins Sibley. And being an intern at Fredericksburg in Spotsylvania in 2006 at the National Park, kind of got interested in there. And then I had a former coworker, friend, who we worked together in the Everglades. She moved out to Petrified Forest, and so I took a trip there. And then I was curious about what these sites, how much it was preserved at places like Valverde and Glorieta Pass. And another friend in the Park Service worked at Fort Union, so kind of visiting them kind of sparked it. I was surprised at how well preserved Glorieta Pass is, as long as you can get to it and get the gate code and all that. And so, yeah, it was just kind of interesting. And as you read it into the campaign, you realize that there's a bigger, I know historians hate to say what if this or what if that, but there is a lot of what ifs, and that just kind of lined up with Chris Murkowski Emerging Civil War Symposium that one year was doing like what ifs of the Civil War. So this fit into that narrative, and I realized the audience there was so receptive to it. Had a lot of questions about it, and that's when right after I got off the podium, I guess that's when I sent the email to Pat and said, "Hey, if you want to be part of this, it looks like there is a crowd wanting more information for it." So that's kind of how it stemmed from that multifaceted approach.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. You mentioned Sibley, because honestly, that's the extent of my knowledge on the New Mexico campaign. I had a gentleman come on and talk about like Juan Cortina's Civil War, so I was moving in that direction too. Aaron, actually, another ECW folk, but I don't know much. So that's like a really cool thing that you guys were able to do with this book, is now I have a way to start kind of diving into this campaign and really getting an understanding of what's happening that far west. It's impressive that you guys were able to do that. So I do commend you for that as well. Okay. Darren, you said you had a few questions as well today, buddy. If you would like to start asking some,
yeah,
I'd like
so
to hear from you as well.
We know obviously it's overlooked massively. So was that part of why you guys wanted to focus on that side of the Civil War?
Yeah, I think it helped. There's, a few authors have done really great work, especially like Don Fraser, Jerry Thompson, Hall, who's now passed. But there's been some work done on it. But compared to other campaigns, it felt like there was a real dearth of literature. And probably an opening where it felt like, I bet there are folks who don't know about this and they would want to read about something new. Again, where you don't know how it ends. You don't know how the story goes. And I don't think anything had been published since. I mean, Megan Kate Nelson's Three-Cornered War touches on this. That is as much a cultural history as a military history. It's a great book, but it wasn't quite the same niche. And even that was, 5-6 years ago now?
God, yeah, it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, adding on to that, I tried to push her a book for the ECW book award of the year and so forth. I'm not sure. I don't think she won it, but I tried. That's how much interest. But I mean, for me, it is overlooked. It is on the edge. But you've got so many themes that would resonate with people. Obviously, you have the men that comprised Sibley's Mounted Texas regiments. Most of them are younger, early 20s. So you get this idea of like the Texas Rangers or the Western Exploration. In addition, you have some of the best unknown regimental commanders that the Confederacy has as well. Guys that will play prominent roles in the Trans-Mississippi. Two of them losing their lives in the process. On the federal side, you have this another guy that's underrated as the overall commander, and then one of the guys is continued service in the Federal Army until he's grievously wounded at that other Gettysburg in the East. So you had those, and you also had the chance of like that what could have happened type thing. For the Confederacy too, what surprised me as well is that this was a high reward, low risk for them adventure, and so Sibley was like, "I'll raise the men, just give me the troops." And in early 61, I'll raise the troops, give me the weapons. And so it was a big win, low risk type thing. And so, it was just one of those campaigns that had those elements that I think would have resonated with people from multiple approaches.
One of the ironies of the "I'll raise the troops, give me the weapons" approaches, they barely even end up giving him weapons. I mean, he's getting lances out of storage from the Mexican War. A lot of this is like a BYOG, bring your own gun. And a lot of the Confederate troops are fighting pitched battles with shotguns from home. And ends up having a real impact. I mean, the overall logistical situation, but even just the weapons has a pretty big impact. The Confederate Army, in any theater, is not exactly over-equipped at any point in the war, but this might be one of the worst equipped Confederate expeditions I've ever read about.
Interesting.
And what about the Union side of things? How well equipped were they? Because again, it's so far away from home, isn't it? Really, in a way, when you think about it, from all those other theaters.
They are shockingly well equipped, I think. Remember that so much of the pre-war Federal Army is based in Western forts.
Mm-hmm.
And so Fort Union in northern New Mexico and Fort Craig in south central New Mexico are two pretty big depots. And so they have 24 and 32 pounder artillery. They've got everyone's got rifled muskets or cavalry carbines well before your average rank and file Union troops in the East have anything but smoothbores. So yeah, the Federal Army is extremely well equipped, especially relative to the Confederate troops that are fighting here.
And that's part of the reason that Sibley does invade the area. He's actually serving at Fort Union before he resigns his commission in early spring of '61. He is a native of Louisiana, and he actually catalogs the weaponry that is being stored there at Fort Union. Fort Union actually was kind of a three-part military installation. You actually had a hospital complex, you had the fort, and then you actually had the armory. And for anyone that works in any type of federal, state, or local government, the bureaucracy in 1860 and 61 was similar to what it is today. If the base commander or the fort commander needed more weapons, he had to write all the way back to Washington, D.C., so they could correspond the heads of those departments to send a notice all the way back. To give you the size of Fort Union, it's got about 1,500 hospital beds. It is the largest hospital complex between Fort Riley in Kansas and the Pacific coast. And so Sibley's, one of his goals is to kind of resupply on the route. He knows what's there. And if he can get to Fort Union, then hopefully he can get some of those supplies. In addition to what's interesting, I mean, as the Federal Army, of course, they're starting to pull troops to the east. They're also concerned about the loyalty of some of these officers. Ones like James Longstreet is in Albuquerque. Albert Sidney Johnson, on his movement from the Pacific Ocean and his Department of the Pacific, will stay in Las Cruces or Mesilla for a little bit, a few days on his way. Other junior officers that play major roles in the Army of Northern Virginia and Brigade Command are there as well. And so, and lastly, you also have the vacuum of this is, of course, the forts are out there because of the Native Americans, and Sibley tries to reach out to them and so forth. But the natives are starting to wonder what's going on, because some of these forts are being abandoned and now there's nothing there. The Apaches specifically knew that Mexico was a safe haven, and so they're running horses and stuff and supplies through. So you have this kind of mix of three types of forces kind of figuring out what's going on in this hinterland. And then, of course, even the territory of New Mexico and Arizona will send a delegate to the Confederate Congress. And so you have already a legitimacy trying to be handled. So the thing is there's a building on Pat's point about the supplies. There is supplies there. That is why Sibley is headed north up to Fort Yukon Pass, eventually into Colorado, if he's successful. And he wants to get those supplies and then ammunition and the advanced weaponry that he knows that's at that arsenal.
Okay. See, I was going to backtrack too and ask you, like, why New Mexico? But it sounds like the forts were sort of a kind of a goal for Sibley to grab. And with that question too, where are they coming from? So where are the Confederates? Where are they at before New Mexico? And what do they have to face to get there? Is there any obstacles? Are there any advanced Union elements that are going to stop them from their location?
It's actually something else that's blue that'll stop them, and that is lack of something blue, and that is water. They will congregate in San Antonio in the central part of the state, but Sibley, I think the best explanation of Sibley's command style, I think, comes from the head of artillery that goes with him, Trevian Teal, who says he never worried about tomorrow, today, which is great when you're commanding a invasion force through an area that is destitute, West Texas and so forth. So the regiments have to space out. They can't all go at the same time. And so that means they're going to limp into southeast New Mexico eventually, where Baylor is and everything. In addition to Baylor and Sibley don't get along. And so that's great. And then you send your most diplomatic regimental commander down into Mexico to try to convince them to allow you to chase if Native Americans are great deals. So these men are coming from Central Texas. They are raised. They are what you would picture a Texas Ranger, I guess, being. And they're traveling through West Texas to get to Marcelo Las Cruces to start the campaign. But they are spaced out, and they got to fight the arid West Texas weather.
That's just the vast distances involved in this campaign through desert. With you're bringing all of your supplies with you. You're not foraging along the way. Unless you're planning on eating sand, and then the lack of water throughout. The region was suffering from a drought that season. All of that really adds up to make this, if not unique, definitely unusual among Civil War campaigns. I mean, you don't have to hear about Robert E. Lee figuring out how to get through the desert with the Army of Northern Virginia, for example.
Right.
And Sibley was, I mean, he didn't lack for vision or ambition, but that Teal quote, Phill, that quote from Trevanian Teal that Phill said really describes Sibley to a T. And you couldn't imagine a worse possible commander for a campaign that was going to be all about the logistics.
Right. That's something you touched on that I was wondering too, is like they have to cross a much different terrain than anybody on the Eastern Theater, hell, even part of the Western Theater. They're not going through a desert where there isn't anything to forage, and the water scarcity is there as well. How are they doing this? Are they like overloading carts and wagons with supplies to where it's hampering their movement? Because you mentioned that they limp in, or are they setting up and maybe having supplies brought into them from other, like maybe a courier or someone on horseback? Like how, I don't know. So that's an interesting question. I'm trying to envision what that would look like, because that's mind-boggling to think that many people are moving through a desert, relying on the supplies that they can get from whatever fort they may have been to last.
It's a great question, and it was a very different logistical chain, I think, to get our heads around compared to studying other campaigns. So the Confederates had no supply lines back to Texas. What they brought with them and what they could buy or forage or capture was what they had to work with. For the march out, they spaced the regiments a day or two apart, and they were just hopscotching from spring to watering hole to spring to watering hole.
Okay.
And they had to space them apart, because if you have 1,000 horses and men drinking from one spring, you're going to run it dry. If you have 3,000, now you have a giant problem.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, they had agents in advance who were civilians who were sympathetic to the Confederacy, who were supposed to be stockpiling supplies. Sibley was promised a lot more supplies than were actually there when he showed up. And then the locals really weren't interested in selling what food they had to the Confederates, because at that point it's an exchange for, it's not even paper money. It's just an IOU that will pay you after the war, maybe hopefully someday. And so there's all this, there's these reports of Confederates saying, we just can't get food from them. And then the Union Army shows up towards the end of the campaign and retakes the territory, and suddenly, they can buy food because they're paying gold.
Okay.
That, and building on that as well, is that you do have, I think one thing that Sibley overlooks as well. Now the regiments, they're all mounted, so the Texans are moving on horseback, so they're not marching through. But I mean, that adds another element, because you need to feed the horses, which they need grain and so forth. In addition to one of the things that came out about like the supplies and provoked is that Sibley does not ignore or underestimates the hostility between the New Mexican residents and Texans. Texans had filibustered across the border in between the Mexican-American War and the beginning of the Civil War, and so now he makes this proclamation that we're come to free or so forth. And they're like, well, we've heard this before, and we've seen them raiding in. Now they're coming in bigger force. And then a lot has to do with the forward thinking of Kim and the federal commander of ordering, even though he's going to stay at Fort Craig, which will be behind the Confederate advance, he's going to order the supplies and so forth moved out in front. And so they're going to try to move from depots of Santa Fe and Albuquerque those supplies that I think Sibley was counting on trying to get. Like, he's trying to get these men to different stops to resupply. And every time he's either too late or he overestimated or he fights with Baylor or something causes. And what's the problem with that is that the men suffer because of that. And so it's a trickle down effect as the campaign goes on.
Yeah. And the Union are obviously much better stocked, because like Pat said earlier, the forts are there and stocked even before the war breaks out. So they're not really wanting for anything when they're making the march to meet Confederates, are they?
By the end of the campaign, they are running low on food. The scorched earth strategy, when you employ a scorched earth strategy all around you, that can come back to bite you in the ass.
Sure.
And so the accounts towards the end of the campaign, they're not starving, but they are really running low on food. It is nonstop, and at least one firsthand account from Fernando Ickes, I think it is. And so that does start to become a factor. And towards the spoiler, the Confederacy does not manage to conquer the entire western third of the United States. As the Confederate army is withdrawing, and frankly in tatters at that point, Canby doesn't pursue very aggressively. And there's at least one, we'll never know exactly why he doesn't leave memoirs. It could be he was just one more federal commander who's not that aggressive. But there's an anecdote from during the campaign where there's some grumbling in the ranks that they've got the Confederates on the ropes. Why aren't we going after them more? And he confronts one officer and says, hey, you haven't had enough to eat in weeks. I know you feel like you're starving. Imagine if we capture them. Now we have to feed thousands more mouths. That's even less food for you. We have them on the run. Why would I try and take more prisoners I can't feed, is the gist of it. Again, the sources for this campaign are thinner on the ground than, say, in Gettysburg, where you have probably thousands of accounts. But I've always thought that struck me as we were writing this. It's a really interesting insight into it. Canby gets like some flack for being too timid, but there's at least a case for he was doing that strategically because he literally couldn't have fed prisoners and his own army. If the other side's on the run, take the win.
That and Pat's exactly right. Unfortunately for us as historians, Canby never gets the chance to write his memoirs or whatnot. It would have been great. I think he's the highest ranking federal officer killed by Native Americans. He gets killed up in the Pacific Northwest, actually at like a treaty gathering or something that goes.
Was this post-war?
Post-war, 1870s or so. Because Canby accepts the surrender of Taylor's army at Citronelle, Alabama. So he actually comes east eventually. But yeah, Canby's right. Also, a point that might come into the factor of Canby is that one of the first court martials of a federal officer is out in New Mexico when Major Isaac Lind, who evacuates prematurely Fort Fillmore, and his men fall apart in the desert. And so, Canby has that. Canby also, you're seeing that most of his regulars have departed. He's got two hot-headed, and they're probably the only hot-headed people from Colorado in the history of Colorado, because Pat says people out there are very mature, tame, and cordial, is Major Sivington and Colonel or General Slough. And of course, they've been arguing with Gabriel Paul up at Fort Union. So you have that mix of so forth. And lastly, as Pat was saying, these guys, Confederates are running desperately, retreating quickly. You use the terrain to your advantage. Why have more mouths to feed and stretch out your supply line when maybe the desert, maybe the cold, or what is it, the Jornada del Muerto, the journey of death from Santa Fe to Las Cruces? That's what the Confederate Army is going through. Yeah. So why why risk something? Let nature take its course.
That's a good way to put it too.
And the Confederate Army, they leave San Antonio with 3,000 troops. They pick up another 500 or so in southern New Mexico when they arrive. And then they ultimately arrive back in San Antonio. I want to say it's like 1,250. So that's roughly 2/3 casualties. And Canby gets to not do one more fight, and he doesn't have to deal with possibly starving his own army. You kind of can't argue with the results. How many Union generals end a campaign inflicting 2/3 casualties on the other army?
Substantial.
And how many do that at all, and how many aren't named U.S. Grant?
No, I think that tracks, man. So let's get to some of the battle that takes place and the battles that happen. So what happens when the Confederates and the Union forces actually meet in New Mexico? How does the battle play out? I don't want to spoil the whole book for anyone, but it's awesome to talk about this stuff and this kind of find out like how the battles play out. So what does happen when they meet for the first time?
Well, Pat, do you want to tell the greatest story out of that? How the first casualties is a four-legged creature outside of Fort Craig?
So this might be one of my favorite Civil War stories. Full stop. Awesome. How to do this without taking up 30 whole minutes. Phill and I could talk about this story forever. So the Union Army is fortified around Fort Craig, which is impregnable unless you have a huge advantage in numbers. Sibley doesn't. Unless you have heavy artillery, Sibley doesn't. Or you have enough food to besiege the Union Army. Sibley definitely doesn't. So Sibley decides, great, they're there. I'm just going to and that's right along the Rio Grande River. And that's critical because it's the only source of water in that part of New Mexico where you can keep an army from dying of thirst. Sibley says, all right, I'm going to just take a 3-day flank march, cross the river, go up the other side, and come out above Fort Craig. And this is all open desert. You can still today stand in one spot and see pretty much the entire route and where the ensuing battle happens.
Wow.
And so the Union Army is looking at Sibley, marching off into the desert and turning north to go around them. And it's pretty easy to guess what he's doing. And so they start to sally out thinking, okay, he's strung out on the march. Maybe we can disrupt the march, fight him piecemeal. It's a good opportunity to try and hit him and disrupt what he's doing. That actual attack lasts for about 12 seconds. Confederates fire off a battery of artillery. They unlimber their little mountain howitzers with their one battery of artillery.
Oh, man.
The Union volunteers are like, we won't want anything to do with this. It's not particularly well executed. I think there's not even casualties from that interaction. Night falls, and Captain Patty Graydon, who is a Union volunteer, very creative, very unconventional warfare approach. He takes a couple of mules, and he takes bags of 24-pounder artillery shells and gunpowder, and he leads the mules up to the edge of the Confederate camp. And the idea is, as the Confederates are trying to water their horses, they're camped for the night, can they unleash these walking bombs into the camp?
Holy crap.
And scatter at least part of the Confederate army, hopefully the wrong way into the desert, maybe force Sibley to fall back. Slightly unclear what the next steps of the plan were, but especially early Civil War, we're in the deserts, Wild West. Sure, this sort of hangs together. So it's dark. They lead them right up to the edge of the camp. They let them loose. The Union scouts turn back for their own lines. They look behind them. The mules are like, no, we follow you where you're going. And the mules are just like patiently following them back. They've already lit the fuses. Union troops make a run for it. The mules don't make it. Spoiler. And that was the charge of the mules.
Oh my God.
It does stampede some Confederate cavalry. So there's some of the cavalry horses are stampeded from that. I don't think we would call it a success, but I do think it's the only mule bombs of the Civil War.
Dude, that's awesome.
And they'd have plenty to eat.
Yeah.
It's awesome unless you're one of the mules, man. Then it's a bad day.
But that brings a question too.
We did not put that on the cover, though. We wanted to put that on the cover, but we thought maybe PETA or something would be upset if we had, exploding mules. We thought maybe a drinking game or something, like you could,
I like that
exploding
idea.
mules, card game.
Kamikaze mules. I love it.
Yeah.
Was there ever a Harper's
what happens when
Weekly
you
done
get
of that?
younger guys?
Or
I don't even know what happens to the senior officer. I mean, it'd be cool to track him down, but I mean, almost like, what do you expect when you get a bunch of guys sitting in a fort? Younger guys bored out of their mind. They're going to come up with some crazy ideas, and I think Gamby's like, you know what? Screw it, go for it. See what's the worst that happens. I'll lose 2 mules and some artillery shells.
Yeah, I mean, you're not losing much there.
And maybe this guy too who keeps bothering me about doing things like exploding
He's
mules.
gonna go lead the mule down there. Follow him right back. Does this trigger anything afterwards? Is it sort of like not a stalemate, but just kind of a lull? Do they not in return fire? Do they try to attack the fort, or is this kind of just it?
It throws the camp into confusion, but they continue the flank march, and so the next day is the Battle of Valverde.
Okay.
And at this point, the Confederates have been on this flank march for a couple of days. They have minimal what water they can carry with them. They're desperately thirsty. That is a theme through every single Confederate account from that day. And so they are coming at the end of this kind of hook-shaped flank march down towards the river and some fords that are north of Fort Craig. And the idea is now they'll have cut off Fort Craig and the Union Army. They can intercept Union supply trains that are coming towards them. They'll have access to water. And then, again, Canby knows what's going on. It's a clever maneuver, but it's not a surprising one if you can see where they're going. And so he sends troops up to meet them at the fords. And it's a kind of a classic meeting engagement. Both sides feed troops in throughout the day. And I'd say with the benefit of hindsight, you wonder what took you so long to send everybody. It's about halfway through the battle before the final Confederate regiment even breaks camp. There's some real breakdown of Confederate command and control, which, Phil, that might be a good intro into Sibley's personality, to put it gently.
Yeah, because I mean, what's great about Sibley is he's an Army commander that doesn't end up on the field of battle until, he misses one of these engagements completely, and then he is very late to the second. But yeah, you really see the trial. I mean, for the Confederate command there, it really falls on a guy named who has the unfortunate name of Tom Green. I guess not the comedian that we all know from the 21st century. There is no relation. I actually did a Wikipedia search to see if there was a connection between the Greens. No, unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess. So it is. I mean, this is a meeting engagement that will basically be fought over the water or the access to the ford. And it is because of there's lack of supplies or lack of military weapons, it is the last Lancer charge in American military history. Company D, 5th Texas.
They have Lancers.
And that's
awesome.
They have Lancers. And I think they run into I forget the company, but I think it's Coloradans, like the 1st Colorado, and they're like, oh, this is cool. And then they wait till they get about 20 yards and they shoot them off. I think 2/3 of the horses and men get shot off their saddles because Lancers are great, but rifles are slightly better. When we were writing this part of the book, I kept thinking of the scene from one of the Indiana Jones when the guy's twirling like the sword and Indiana Jones just shoots him. Like, I'm thinking that's what these Coloradans are doing, waiting for like the Texans to charge, and like, oh, that's cool, they look pretty, and then just shoot them anyway. So, but yeah, no. If you want to add anything to the charge there, I don't want to talk about your Coloradans, Pat, without
they're fair game for everyone, but it is it's an independent Ford's independent company of Coloradans. They get incorporated into the 2nd Colorado much later on in things, and they are If I remember right, they are armed with smoothbores. They're loading with buckshot, and yeah, they are waiting until you can see the whites of the horse's eyes. It is. They were they had been drilling for months for being their first engagement. They were well drilled, well led, very well prepared for this particular engagement. Yeah. That said, it does. They basically, the Confederates sacrificed that entire company of Lancers. I mean, there's almost no one left by the end of it, including their commanding officer is mortally wounded. But at that point, the Confederates were being pushed back, and this does push the Union troops back on their heels a little bit because, yeah, they repelled the attack, but holy shit, you just got charged by Lancers in 1862. Yeah. No, you're not prepared for that. And they do kind of, it does buy the Confederate troops time to bring up more reinforcements and stabilize their line. So it's a bad day if you're a Lancer.
Yeah.
But to the credit of Tom Green, who orders the charge, it was a savvy move to salvage the battle at that point.
This is Belverde still, right?
Yeah.
Can I just ask what sort of numbers are involved in these battles out in this Eastern Theatre?
Couple. Oh, Phil, go ahead.
Sorry, no, yeah, I was just. I know the Confederates are only going to get pretty much one whole regiment on the field, and then second one's coming up. So that's the other thing with the mass control of the Sibley not being in there is the coordination. I mean, Tom Green's entire regiment, I think the 5th Texas is there. So you're looking at maybe a third of the Confederate force, maybe half, if that. Federal numbers are escaping me right now, but off the top of your head.
Theoretically 3,800, but a lot of them never see combat. Partially it's because they're being fed in piecemeal. And then when the Union line does eventually crumble, one full regiment, so close to 1,000 troops, looks and says they're ordered in to try and shore up what is at that point a complete rout. They look at it and they're like, we're good. We're going to take a pass on this one. Thanks. And that is the contribution of, I think it's the 1st or 2nd New Mexico Volunteers. I think that is the entirety of their contribution to the war.
Okay. Are regimental level sizes, are they different than what they are in the Eastern Theater, or are they pretty accurately? I mean, are they much smaller or much bigger? Because I know in some cases that you can have like 1,000 in a regiment, and sometimes you can have anywhere up to like 250. So
most of the volunteer regiments, I think, are in the like 750 to 1,000 range because they are pretty freshly mustered in. So at the start of the campaign, you're talking full strength regiment. Awesome. That said, all of the things you deal with in the Eastern Theater of as soon as you put all these people into a camp together, they all end up getting measles and pneumonia and smallpox, and a bunch of them just are going to die of exposure.
Right.
Or it turns out they really weren't fit for this and they need to get sent home. So you're going to do all of that attrition in the middle of a campaign here, whereas the Eastern Theater armies, to some extent, had the benefit of doing that in camp between campaigns.
Yeah. So they're actively dealing with the diseases and illnesses basically on the field of battle. I mean, virtually.
Yeah. And the harsher conditions obviously help accelerate that.
Yeah, conditions. That's one of the reasons too. Sibley is trying to recruit younger. I think the majority of them fall in the low 20s range. A lot of them aren't married. That's another reason why there's not a lot of sources. They don't have anyone to write home to. And one or two of the ones that are great letter writers, unfortunately, will become casualties during the campaign. So, of course, their letters stop. But, I mean, these guys are going to go west, and then eventually they're going to head after Valverde and so forth into the mountains, in the northern New Mexico as they wait for the next part of the campaign. And some of them are experiencing snow. I mean, so they're bored at all. They're malnourished. And so forth. So, yeah, there is what you have in the East, like Pat was saying, mixed with the weather. If you've ever been into New Mexico and Arizona, it can be warm at night and very cold, warm during the day, very cold at night type thing. And the supplies aren't there for these guys. So some of the Texans initially could probably, because of bravado, youth, and so forth, hold up a little more. But There's also, as they get sick, they get strung out. I mean, and if horses get sick, some of the men become foot soldiers, and they don't like that at all because they came to be mounted. So then you have that problem.
So not having so much source material to sort of go off, say, like letters and stuff. So was that a lot harder to sort of piece this together for you guys? As far as like if you was doing something in the Eastern Theatre, you'd have that rich source material, wouldn't you?
Yeah, it felt for me, it felt like you have fewer conflicting sources, and it was important to remember that doesn't mean we can be totally confident what happened. It means there's just fewer sources that might conflict with each other, and so it's having to be a little more conscious about taking that with a big grain of salt. Yeah, I would say we felt great about the broad strokes of the campaign, but you start getting down to the tactical level, and you just want to be careful you're not overstating your certainty on some of these things. And then it does leave some gaps. There's in my mind, there's one really good firsthand rank and file Union account of the climactic Battle of Glorieta, and that's going to be Ovando Hollister's. And then you have a handful of officers' reports in the ORs from that battle, but I feel like the Union side of that fight is really undertold, and that includes, we'll get to it maybe, but there's a dramatic Union flank march, and it's extremely controversial who led that. What officer led the flank march, but who was their guide on that route? You look at 3 sources, you'll get 4 answers.
I was going to ask that. Do they typically, the sources, even though they're kind of limited, do they match up and do they corroborate themselves, or is there a lot of, there's not a lot of sources, but are there any differing accounts that were kind of hard to look at, or were they all pretty concise?
I would have said broad strokes. There's not a lot of contradiction in terms of here's the overall course of the campaign. It does. I would have said less conflict and more. These tend to be battles they're fighting. They're not fighting in shoulder to shoulder, 3 ranks deep like it's Pickett's charge. It's a lot of dismounted cavalry fighting in loose order on rough terrain, and especially as you get up to Glorieta, the visibility is non-existent, and that's before the gunpowder and the confusion and the fighting. And so it's more, okay, this source is seeing their 20-foot wide part of this. Another source might be across the way, but they're on the other side of the canyon. They're going to see something totally different. That's kind of how I thought about it. But Phill, what do you think?
No, 100%. And then you also add in elements of, I'll just throw it out there. On that flank, the Great Flank Movement or whatever, the guide or so forth, you have that animosity between a native New Mexican that has Hispanic descent and Major Shivington, who we know later on has no problem committing a massacre of Native Americans at Sand Creek. And that plays a little bit of a role into it. And then on the other side of it, on the Confederate side especially, some of these guys are barely literate that are coming. These are guys that are on the frontier. They're great with a weapon. They can sleep outside. They're what you would need on the frontier, which doesn't mean, and also not being married or having anyone at home. They may keep a diary, but they're not going to write many letters. You also have a very interesting take with the Confederate High Command. Of course, Sibley and Baylor will squabble. So you have 2 conflicting stories there. Sibley's actually recalled all the way to the Richmond to answer for what he does. Even when Sibley presents this to Jeff Davis to get his commission, no one keeps a record of what that conversation is, even at that point. And then you have the animosity. Teal and Sibley will get mad at each other. And so there isn't a rumor of Sibley thinking about a court-martial, but that means he actually has to put his bottle down long enough to actually write something. And then most of your regimental commanders will be killed before the war's out, and so forth. And so they're not going to write much.
Right.
And on the federal side too, of course, Canby does. We already talked about him, but the commander under him at Fort Union will be shot on Cemetery Hill through the eyes. He survives, but he's not going to write too much when you're blinded and so forth. And so And then Slough is a hothead. So you have this category of like, you have the perfect storm of people there that could write something because they're engaged throughout the war, but because they're so aggressive or so frontline, a lot of them don't make it through the war to write anything. And then, or as Sibley does, he's kicked out of 2 different armies on this continent and 1 in Egypt, which I think his major feat is finding alcohol in Egypt, fighting for the Khedive. So that guy can find whiskey anywhere, but the problem is he doesn't find a pen or a pencil to write anything either. So that I think is the hardest part. So yeah, you don't have those private stories. Also, both of the encounters are, I mean, Glorieta Pass is just like the Gettysburg of the East. They bump into each other and then they try to figure out what's going on, and then the Confederates have to skedaddle. And so, the death of Major John Shropshire, who was a great letter writer back to his wife, he gets killed there at Glorieta Pass, and so you lose that chance of having a guy who's very articulate, who is very sound in his viewpoints, and kind of remind me a little bit of E.P. Alexander with when he writes his Confederate or his military memoir, where he sees things more objectively. His death there on the last day is, I mean, tragic and for multiple accounts, not just for his wife, but for students of the campaign.
That brings up, since we're wrapping up a little bit here, we still have a few minutes, but Glorieta Pass, let's talk about that. I mean, that's a big deal. Gettysburg of the West, if you will. So if you guys wanted to take the floor on that, I'd love to learn more about that one in particular.
And before we do get started, I would like to put a plug on, if anyone is a member of the American Battlefield Trust or so forth, they actually have a campaign to save some land at Apache Canyon, which is the engagement. And so, so it's nice to see some love from the American Battlefield Trust. I know they have so many acres of land to save east of Mississippi. They're actually still concentrating. So there is still looking out.
Awesome.
So just wanted to throw it out there because I got that mailer recently, and I was probably the only person in the city of Baltimore excited that some land in New Mexico is being saved. Yeah. So,
no, that's awesome, man. That's good to hear.
So yeah, after Valverde, it's a tactical victory for the Confederates. Sibley retreats back into Fort Craig, and the Confederates still have the same problem. They can't storm Fort Craig. They can't bombard it. They don't have heavy enough artillery, and they can't outlast the siege. So they just keep going north. If you don't have supply lines, you can't just leave the enemy in your rear. They have that one advantage going for them. They capture Albuquerque, but the depot is burned as they ride into town. They do capture one small depot, I think in Cabarro, and then they capture the territorial capital of Santa Fe. It's one of only a couple state or territorial capitals captured by the Confederacy during the war. But at that point, the civilian government has hidden the supplies and evacuated across the Sangre de Cristo Mountains to Fort Union, which is on the way to Colorado. And Glorieta Pass is a mountain pass that's between Santa Fe in the west and Fort Union in the east. And at this point, Sibley's army, they've captured enough supplies along the way. They could keep going for a few more weeks, but they need to capture Fort Union, which is a major depot. And given how many troops Canby has down at Fort Craig, it seems like Fort Union might be underdefended. And Canby's left a handful of companies of regulars there. There's a real chance that Sibley could have just taken that by storm. Except when word of the defeat at Valverde makes it north to Colorado, the governor of Colorado at this point has raised a company of volunteers, and he sends them on what ends up being a forced march. I think it works out to something like 240 miles in 10 days, maybe a little bit less, through the winter over a mountain pass. And the first Colorado arrives in Fort Union with just under 1,000 infantry. In theory, they are supposed to just hold Fort Union. The commander of the first Colorado is a colonel of volunteers. The commander of Fort Union is a regular Army officer with, I think his rank is major, something like that. He has also been handed a field commission as a colonel of volunteers, like a lot of regular Army officers were. Mm-hmm. But this professional soldier who's a career soldier, Gabriel Rene Paul, his colonel of volunteers commission post dates the first Colorado's colonel by a few days, meaning the colonel of the 1st Colorado, who has no experience whatsoever, is now in charge of all of the troops in northern New Mexico. No one is happy about this. No one gets along about this. Canby sends him the most pedantic, condescending orders you can imagine. He's like, here's how to assign people to picket duty. Here's how to feed them. Here's how to load backpacks. It is such an excruciating level of detail. And it includes one, and basically the gist is, just hold on in Fort Union. We'll figure it out. Don't fuck anything up, guys. Yes, maybe listen to the guy who's there who knows what he's doing. And
Right.
he has one line in there about, you could go harass the enemy. Sure, you can reconnoiter, you can harass the enemy. Colonel John Slough, the 1st Colorado, sees that one line and is like, great, I'm marching out with every soldier I have, and we're going to go liberate Santa Fe, but we'll call it harassing the enemy. He marches into Glorieta Pass, not really knowing what's in front of him. At the same time, the Confederate Army, in a couple of wings, is trying to move into different parts of the pass and could theoretically cut off Union troops in the middle and surround them in the canyon. Very Western movie style, but theoretically could have worked. March 26th, you have a meeting engagement where the 1st Colorado and some U.S. regulars hit the vanguard of the Confederate troops in Apache Canyon and drive them back. Confederates panic. They retreat back to the mouth of the canyon and send frantic messages begging for help. And the other wing of the Confederate Army makes an overnight forced march to reinforce them rather than sealing off the other end of the canyon. On March 27th, both sides wait for the other side to attack. And then on the morning of March 28th, both sides say, fuck it, we're impatient. And then you have another meeting engagement. One theme throughout this is the entire Confederate Army is mounted. Union Army has plenty of cavalry. No one ever knows where the other side is. The core functions of cavalry are an absolute disaster, especially for the Confederates in this campaign. They can't scout. They can't really raid for supplies. They are at best very hungry and expensive mounted infantry. It is kind of remarkable just how much the Confederate Army absolutely fails at knowing where the other side is time and time and time again.
Yeah.
That brings us to March 28th, which is sort of the climactic part of Glorieta Pass. I've been talking for a bit. Phill, do you want to?
Sure. So the object is now the ranking Confederate commander is a guy with the coolest nickname probably in the Confederate Army of New Mexico or Sibley's forces, and that's William Dirty Shirt Scurry, who got the nickname because he apparently was too busy trying to get Texas to secede to ever change his shirt while he's canvassing these Texas counties. And so his battle plan, is to, of course, be aggressive and push through to the canyon. Small reserve back at the back guarding the supplies and what's left of his, or the artillery piece or two that happens to be there. As he's doing, he's actually them attacking toward Pigeon's Ranch and so forth. That is dramatic. Charge should be successful, and that's the one that will kill Major John Shropshire, one of the highest. And of course, I was trying to think. I think it's Manuel Rojas or Manuel Rosa is the one that understands there's a path around the Confederate flank. And of course, Chivington is like, okay, Major John Chivington serving under John Slough is going to take this idea and say, yeah, let me loop around. And so as the Confederates push, this force comes in around their flank and destroys the supply. So Confederates technically would have been victorious at Glorieta Pass, except of this one daring movement. Once again, probably building on Pat's point, is cavalry or something should be on the flank, should be doing, maybe they should have known something. But once again, the only scouts they've got are more, and they've even referred themselves as brigands under what Charles Parran, the Arizona Brigands or something they call them, out of the Tucson area. And so they basically are men on horses, and they don't know anything about traditional cavalry roles. And so as Scurry pushes forward, of course, they start seeing the smoke and confusion and the sounds of battle behind them and everything. And that is, no matter what battlefield you're on, the east or west coast, what Confederate or enemy soldiers are behind you, you usually realize you're not in the best predicament. But they are going to try to push through. In fact, there is a line that they know past Pigeon's Ranch that some of the men get, because they actually find their bodies in the 20th century and bring them into Santa Fe.
No kidding.
And they identify one or two of these as Texan soldiers, because one of them's wearing a band on the finger, and it's engraved with his name. And so they kind of know they got that far past Pigeon Ranch on their attack and so forth. And there was a little monument park there commemorating it. But yeah, so just like the Gettysburg of the East, it is 3 days, but instead the whole second day is spent going, okay, the other one's going to attack, the other one's going to attack, and if he doesn't, I guess it would be more like a Battle of Stones River, where they both stare at each other one day, and then the next day they go, okay, we're going to attack, and so forth. And so, but I guess the Stones River of the far west doesn't sound as fun as the Gettysburg of the west. So.
Yeah, I would think of Glorieta as it is a tactical victory for the Confederates. They do push the Union back from successive lines. Union retreats at the end of the day. Confederates hold the field, except for that flank march has wiped out the Confederate supply train. And so to the extent they were already struggling with the logistics, now they are completely without recourse. And that is functionally the end of the campaign for them. There will be another month of skirmishing and retreating and being thirsty in the desert. But that flank march to destroy the supply train is, it wasn't the goal of the flank march, but it is the result. And that is really the climax of the campaign, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty resounding.
Napoleon said it best years before, it's better to be lucky than good. I think that explains that flank march and so forth. For the Confederate side, if you want to use a future campaign, it's what Patton said about Market Garden in War of Till. It's one such victory like that, and we'll lose the war. And that's exactly what happened for the Confederates. So I was trying to throw, sorry, is that throwing shade at Darren's English Bernard Montgomery there? I apologize. I didn't mean to
no worries,
bring War II history into it. Sorry, I started saying it. I was like, oh, crap, we got an Englishman here, and I'm just about to say this.
Sorry, I'll just disappear. No, I'm joking. I do have one little question to ask you guys. So obviously, emergency Civil War books are known for being able to take out onto the battlefield. So how much of this is accessible nowadays? Has a lot of it been lost, or, you know, how accessible is it?
It is very, I mean, Valverde, it depends on what type of vehicle you got, I guess. If you want to get to Valverde, you need a high clearance vehicle, but you can at least get to the very, very edge, kind of off the battlefield edge. If you're familiar with the Texas marble monuments that are at like Antietam and Gettysburg and so forth, there is one at Valverde.
Oh, no kidding.
And so commemorating there. Fort Craig is in ruins, but it is preserved by the Bureau of Land Management, I think it is, BLM site, because it's but once again, it's 8 miles down a gravel road. They have a small little visitor center that's open seasonally. So you have that. Glorieta Pass is part of a national park, Pecos National Historical Park. It is pretty well preserved. There was a nice trail, signs, and so forth. You do have to go to the visitor center to get a gate code to access the parking lot there. It's the drive out there is basically through what probably would have looked like at the time if there was a few more houses. Fort Union National Monument is preserved as a national park as well. There is a earthen fort in front of the what would have been the pre-Civil War fort, because Cammy's a little nervous that the fort may not be able to withstand. And then what's the neatest thing is that on the retreat, Teal will bury those howitzers outside of Albuquerque because they run out of the ability to pull them out. And then he goes back out after the war and finds them, digs them up. and they did stand in the town square of Albuquerque until New Mexico
Cool.
reached their museum. And now they have an exhibit, and you can see one of the artillery pieces that would have made it all the way up through to Albuquerque and through the campaign. And so the Museum of New Mexico History is definitely worth a visit there in Albuquerque. So, and then there is a few little monuments around the field. Pigeon Ranch, Kowalski Ranch are both preserved. So there's a lot that is there. I guess the small engagement of Peralta and down in the engagement that happens before that Major Lynn tries to fight down Las Cruces, both of those have been overtaken by civilization. But I would say for a campaign on the fringes of society, there's a decent amount to see, and we do give you great directions, driving routes, that information, because if you don't have the right type of cell phone, you're going to be like Sibley in 1862.
I had to get some light on it here, man, too, because before we close out, I wanted to make sure, and I know it's backwards, but I do have a copy of the book here. I wanted to make sure everybody can see that. Where is the best place to get this from either of you? Where is the most easy or a preferred place to buy it if anyone wanted to grab the book?
I mean, from one of us, if you're going to be in Gettysburg this weekend, it's Friday night, I'm speaking at this George Spangler farm as part of the lecture series.
Cool.
Pat and I are both, as of right now, God willing, and the creek don't rise, but be at ECW Symposium if you want to get our signatures there. I mean, obviously, you can go to any bookstore you want, but you want to get it from one of the authors. That's we'll make sure we sign it that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Awesome. Darren, did you have anything else before we close out today, bud?
Thank you for telling us about that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you guys joining and chatting about this today. It's, again, a whole different campaign that I'm used to, and it was very insightful, too, so I appreciate that.
Thanks so much for having us.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem. And we will see everybody on the next one. Thank you.